table for your dessert is a pie, and a homemade pie made by you. Maybe it's an apple pie, a pumpkin pie, or maybe you're gonna make a turkey pot pie, but wouldn't you wanna know how to make the pie crust? So let's start with the pie crust. If you're a beginner and you've had a little trouble making pie crust, my suggestion is we're going to start with a simple one crust at a time. So there is 1 and 1/4 cups of flour and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. That's all that's in here, is a little flour and a little salt. I've mixed that up. The key to a pie is taking the fat and incorporating it into your flour. And it depends on the fat. When you're beginning, I highly suggest that we use shortening. Ingredients, a basic material, that's all you need. And you can start cutting away. We're gonna cut like this. Don't stir. It's just trying to get that fat cut up. And as you can see, that's gonna take a little time. We're gonna turn the bowl 1/4 of a turn, and we're just trying to get that fat incorporated into the flour. When you make cookies, you cream the fat into the sugar. So it's a little bit different making cookies or cakes. But when you're making pie crust and biscuits, the difference between a pie crust and biscuits is you've added baking powder. And you're probably gonna finish it off with milk instead of water. You can see that takes a little time. I can remember as a kid sitting down, just enjoying some time to make the pie crust for my mom. If you are fortunate enough to have a pastry blender, the pastry blender has these holes and lines so that all you have to do is up and down. You can use it instead of the knives. But we're just trying to get the look of maybe small sand, small white sands. We just want to keep working that fat in there. What do I exactly want that to look like at the end? Well, since it takes a little bit of time, keep working it. All the fat molecules need to have all the flour molecules need to have a little bit of fat with them, or all the fat needs to have flour with it. What does it need to look like? Well, maybe you're fortunate enough to have a food processor. A food processor is an advanced method more because you have to be a little bit more knowledgeable of how that needs to look. This is a place where I like to use my butter. I cannot use butter and do this method. It has not worked for even me. But to use cold butter, it just came out of the refrigerator. Very cold butter. I just put in a little bit of butter, and I'm just gonna pulse it a couple times. So then I'm just gonna put in a little more. I'm just gonna keep dropping that butter down in the chute. And it doesn't take too many pulses, and you have exactly what I need. And we're gonna dump that butter, or dump that flour and butter into this bowl so you can see how fine we're trying to get that fat incorporated in. If I take my fork, you can see there's no butter left. And that's actually what we're trying to accomplish with the food processor and maybe the pastry blender or the 2 knives. It needs to look like this. Okay, we have finished incorporating our fat into the flour, and we have almost what it looks like a white grainy sand. It's very small fat molecules in there. That's the one I used with just the pastry blender or the 2 knives. And here is the one that I used with the food processor. Both look excellent. What we are going to use is cold water. Very cold water. This just came out of the refrigerator. You might even put an ice cube in it to make sure that it stays cold. I live in Colorado, and in Colorado our flour is actually drier, and so it takes a little bit more than the recipes call for. My recipe calls for 2 to 3 tablespoons of flour, and I know it's going to take a little bit more than that, but I like to take just a 1/4 cup in a small bowl so that when I put it in, I'm not I don't want to put too much in. So I want to make sure that I have my flour all flat, and I'm going to stir this into a circle. So I just kind of want to put a little water into a circle, and I'm going to quickly stir this in. This is actually the part where a lot of pie bakers don't understand that this is the delicate part, because if I over mix this, this will make a tougher crust. So I want to put enough water in. I'm going to stir it up, and I want it to come to a ball. So again, my recipe only called for 2 to 3 tablespoons, and that was a 1/4 cup. And when I get it mixed up a little like that, I'm starting to see that it's still a little dry. So I'm going to carefully pour just a little tiny bit of water in there. But I need it to come to a ball. Patience with me, because it's coming to that ball. This is why I think working with a small little bit of flour first, we can make the top one little drop more. Mix it. I want to be able to take that pie crust out of the bowl and put it onto where I'm going to roll it out. I like rolling it out on a silicone. You can do it onto your counter. I like to make a nice little disc, and I don't want to add too much flour, but I don't want it to stick. I always go center out, and I usually try a good 4 directions before I pick it up and turn it. And I want to kind of keep that into a circle the best that I can. Center out. And not too much pressure, but just enough to get it to roll. And if I feel that it's beginning to stick, I can sprinkle just a little tiny bit of flour on it. Just a little bit of flour on my board. I like to turn my pastry a lot. It keeps it from sticking. I'm starting to think that this is getting to about the right, as thin as I like it. I take my pie plate and I measure it. And I need my pie crust to be just bigger around the edges than the pie plate. I think I can roll just a little more. Let's pick it up one more time. It's not too hard to pick up. If you have a hard time picking it up, here's another way to do it. Roll it gently on the rolling pin, pick it up, and now we're going to put it on the pie plate this way. And we're going to gently pat that in there. Don't stretch your pie crust. If you stretch your pie crust, your pie will bake and it will pull away from the pan, and you'll end up with a much smaller pie. So we don't want to stretch it. We just want to gently put it in there. Wanted to show you how to make the pie filling to go into our pie. I have already pre-chopped. I peeled and pre-chopped. As you can see, I still have a little peeling, so peeling them perfectly is not necessary. But some people don't even peel their apples, but I peel them and chop them. Try to get them as even as you possibly can. You want about, I use 7 apples. I like the Granny Smith. You want a good tart, firm cooking apple. These are 7 apples, and you want maybe close to 8 to 10 cups of apples to be able to put into the pie to make a nice pie. So I'm gonna add some sugar. I like about, you can use 3/4 of a cup to a cup of sugar. In here I have the flour, some cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg, some salt. Just kind of find your recipe, decide what you like, and then put it in there, and we're going to mix that all up. I'm going going to put this in my pie crust that we have made earlier. I like them mounded because I know those apples cook down. But I do think that I have had a little too much. So we're not going to overpile it, but having it nice and even. I like to spread a couple tablespoons of butter, chopped butter, around the top of the pie. And now we're gonna roll out the top crust. This is the top crust, and I am actually using the one that I made with butter. I want to refrigerate the crust after I have incorporated the water into the butter one. Now that it's nice, ice and cold, I can roll it gently. Again, I go center out, and I pick it up several times. The butter one gets a little bit harder to pick up, which is why I prefer to see beginners start with shortening. I think that that should be big enough. I like to just measure. Absolutely, that's big enough. Again, we can roll the pie crust onto our rolling pin and roll it across the pie if that makes it easier for you. Again, we don't want to stretch the top of the pie any more than we wanted to stretch the bottom, so we want to get it rolled out. Rolling is different from stretching, or from if you stretched it. I want to kind of seal this. This is where I need to seal the edges here. If I don't seal it, that's where you get the apple juices starting to seep out into the oven, and then we make a mess in our oven. And we just want to kind of make sure that we have all of those edges in. We have to put a vent hole. You can do it however you want. You can make a pretty design. You just need to make a vent hole. That's let that air out. This is where I'm going to trim back a little bit of my pie crust. My kids always liked it when I had a little extra. I threw it in another pie pan, put a little cinnamon and sugar, and baked it with the pie. That always disappeared really fast. Okay, now you want to tuck those together. You can make your a pretty indentation like this, or you can take a fork and go around the edges. Just somehow you have to get these together. And you have to make sure you're kind of pressing a little bit hard because you want to get to make sure that dough is going together. I want less mess in my oven as I possibly can. It might seep out, but I would like to keep all those juices inside. Now that can go in the oven as is. Some people do an egg wash. I was always taught to do it either a cream or a milk wash. You can use half and half, cream, milk. It makes a nice tender crust. The egg wash can make a nice shiny crust. Everybody has their own little way and preference of how to do it. I just like to brush on a little cream. So that's one option. One option is nothing. And then we're gonna put just a sprinkling of sugar on there. Just sprinkle a little sugar across the top. Might even be just a tablespoon. And now that pie is ready for the oven for 425 for 10 minutes. And I like to turn them down to 350. And you can nice watch it for the next 50 minutes to an hour. Thank you. The pie has cooled for about 5 hours.